Book 1, Chapter 2 of Michael Strogoff, Courier of the Tsar. This recording is in the public domain. Michael Strogoff by Jules Verne. Book 1, Chapter 2 Russians and Tartars. The Tsar had not so suddenly left the ballroom of the new palace, when the fate he was giving to the civil and military authorities and principal people of Moscow was at the height of its brilliancy, without ample cause, for he had just received information that serious events were taking place beyond the frontiers of the Ural. It had become evident that a formidable rebellion threatened to wrest the Siberian provinces from the Russian crown. Asiatic Russia, or Siberia, covers a superficial area of 1,790,208 square miles, and contains nearly 2 millions of inhabitants. Extending from the Ural Mountains, which separate it from Russia in Europe, to the shores of the Pacific Ocean, it is bounded on the south by Turkestan and the Chinese Empire, on the north by the Arctic Ocean, from the Sea of Kara to Bering's Straits. It is divided into several governments or provinces, those of Tobolsk, Yeniseisk, Irkutsk, Omsk, and Yakutsk, contains 2 districts, Okhotsk and Kamchatka, and possesses 2 countries, now under the Muscovite dominion, that of the Kirghiz and that of the Chukchis. This immense extent of steppes, which includes more than 110 degrees from west to east, is a land to which criminals and political offenders are banished. 2 governor-generals represent the supreme authority of the Tsar over this vast country. The higher one resides at Irkutsk, the far capital of eastern Siberia. The river Chuna separates the 2 Siberias. No rail yet furrows these wide plains, some of which are in reality extremely fertile. No iron ways lead from those precious mines which make the Siberian soil far richer below than above its surface. The traveler journeys in summer in a kibik or telga, in winter in a sledge. An electric telegraph, with a single wire more than 8,000 versts in length, alone affords communication between the western and eastern frontiers of Siberia. On issuing from the Ural, it passes through Ekaterinburg, Kasernov, Tyumen, Ishim, Omsk, Elamsk, Kolyvan, Tomsk, Krasnoyarsk, Nizhny Udinsk, Irkutsk, Verkhny Nertchinsk, Strelink, Albazin, Blagovstinsk, Rade, Orlomskaya, Alexandrovsky, and Nikolaevsk, and 6 rubles and 19 kopecks are paid for every word sent from one end to the other. From Irkutsk there is a branch to Kiakhta, on the Mongolian frontier, and from thence, for 30 kopecks a word, the post conveys the dispatches to Peking in a fortnight. It was this wire, extending from Ekaterinburg to Nikolaevsk, which had been cut, first beyond Tomsk, and then between Tomsk and Kolyvan. This was why the Tsar, to the communication made to him for the second time by General Kissoff, had answered by the words, "A courier this moment." The Tsar remained motionless at the window for a few moments, when the door was again opened. The chief of police appeared on the threshold. "Enter, General," said the Tsar briefly, "and tell me all you know of Ivan Ogareff." "He is an extremely dangerous man, sire," replied the chief of police. "He ranked as colonel, did he not?" "Yes, sire." "Was he an intelligent officer?" "Very intelligent, but a man whose spirit it was impossible to subdue; and possessing an ambition which stopped at nothing, he became involved in secret intrigues, and was degraded from his rank by His Highness the Grand Duke, and exiled to Siberia." "How long ago was that?" 2 years since. Pardoned after 6 months of exile by your Majesty's favor, he returned to Russia.
"And since that time has he not revisited Siberia?"
"Yes, sire, but he voluntarily returned there," replied the chief of police, adding, and slightly lowering his voice, "There was a time, sire, when none returned from Siberia."
"Well, whilst I live, Siberia is and shall be a country whence men can return."
The Tsar had the right to utter these words with some pride, for often by his clemency he had shown that Russian justice knew how to pardon. The head of the police did not reply to this observation, but it was evident that he did not approve of such half measures. According to his idea, a man who had once passed the Ural Mountains in charge of policemen ought never again to cross them. Now, it was not thus under the new reign, and the chief of police sincerely deplored it. What? No banishment for life for other crimes than those against social order? What? Political exiles returning from Tobolsk, from Yakutsk, from Irkutsk? In truth, the chief of police, accustomed to the despotic sentences of the ukase which formerly never pardoned, could not understand this mode of governing. But he was silent, waiting until the Czar should interrogate him further. The questions were not long in coming. "Did not Ivan Ogareff," asked the Czar, "return to Russia a second time, after that journey through the Siberian provinces, the object of which remains unknown?" "He did." "And have the police lost trace of him since?" "No, sire, for an offender only becomes really dangerous from the day he has received his pardon." The Czar frowned. Perhaps the chief of police feared that he had gone rather too far, though the stubbornness of his ideas was at least equal to the boundless devotion he felt for his master. But the Czar, disdaining to reply to these indirect reproaches cast on his policy, continued his questions. "Where was Ogareff last heard of?" "In the province of Perm." "In what town?" "At Perm itself." "What was he doing?" "He appeared unoccupied, and there was nothing suspicious in his conduct." "Then he was not under the surveillance of the secret police?" "No, sire." "When did he leave Perm?" "About the month of March." "To go?" "Where, is unknown." "And it is not known what has become of him?" "No, sire, it is not known." "Well, then, I myself know," answered the Czar. "I have received anonymous communications which did not pass through the police department, and, in the face of events now taking place beyond the frontier, I have every reason to believe that they are correct." "Do you mean, sire," cried the chief of police, "that Ivan Ogareff has a hand in this Tartar rebellion?" "Indeed I do, and I will now tell you something which you are ignorant of. After leaving Perm, Ivan Ogareff crossed the Ural Mountains, entered Siberia, and penetrated the Kirghiz steppes, and there endeavored, not without success, to foment rebellion amongst their nomadic population. He then went so far south as Free Turkestan. There, in the provinces of Bokhara, Kokand, and Kunduz, he found chiefs willing to pour their Tartar hordes into Siberia and excite a general rising in Asiatic Russia. The storm has been silently gathering, but it has at last burst like a thunderclap, and now all means of communication between eastern and western Siberia have stopped. Moreover, Ivan Ogareff, thirsting for vengeance, aims at the life of my brother." The Czar had become excited whilst speaking, and now paced up and down with hurried steps. The chief of police said nothing, but he thought to himself that, during the time when the emperors of Russia never pardoned an exile, schemes such as those of Ivan Ogareff could never have been realized. Approaching the Czar, who had thrown himself into an armchair, he asked, "Your Majesty has of course given orders so that this rebellion may be suppressed as soon as possible?" "Yes," answered the Czar. "The last telegram which reached Nijni Udinsk would set in motion the troops in the governments of Yenisei, Irkutsk, Yakutsk, as well as those in the provinces of the Amur and Lake Baikal. At the same time, the regiments from Perm and Nijni Novgorod, and the Cossacks from the frontier, are advancing by forced marches toward the Ural Mountains. But some weeks must pass before they can attack the Tartars." "And your Majesty's brother, His Highness the Grand Duke, is now isolated in the government of Irkutsk, and is no longer in direct communication with Moscow?" "That is so." "But by the last dispatches he must know what measures have been taken by your Majesty, and what help he may expect from the governments nearest Irkutsk." "He knows that," answered the Czar; "but what he does not know is that Ivan Ogareff, as well as being a rebel, is also playing the part of a traitor, and that in him he has a personal and bitter enemy. It is to the Grand Duke that Ogareff owes his first disgrace, and what is more serious is, that this man is not known to him. Ogareff's plan, therefore, is to go to Irkutsk, and under an assumed name, offer his services to the Grand Duke.
Then, after gaining his confidence, when the Tartars have invested Irkutsk, he will betray the town, and with it my brother, whose life he seeks. This is what I have learned from my secret intelligence. This is what the Grand Duke does not know, and this is what he must know." "Well, sire, an intelligent, courageous courier—" "I momentarily expect one." "And it is to be hoped he will be expeditious," added the chief of police. "For, allow me to add, sire, that Siberia is a favorable land for rebellions." "Do you mean to say, General, that the exiles would make common cause with the rebels?" exclaimed the Czar.
"Excuse me, your majesty," stammered the chief of police, for that was really the idea suggested to him by his uneasy and suspicious mind.
"I believe in their patriotism," returned the Czar.
"There are other offenders besides political exiles in Siberia," said the chief of police.
"The criminals? Oh, General, I give those up to you. They are the vilest, I grant, of the human race. They belong to no country. But the insurrection, or rather the rebellion, is not to oppose the emperor. It is raised against Russia, against the country which the exiles have not lost all hope of again seeing, and which they will see again. No, a Russian would never unite with a Tartar, to weaken, were it only for an hour, the Muscovite power."
The Czar was right in trusting to the patriotism of those whom his policy kept, for a time, at a distance. Clemency, which was the foundation of his justice, when he could himself direct its effects, the modifications he had adopted with regard to applications for the formerly terrible ukases, warranted the belief that he was not mistaken. But even without this powerful element of success in regard to the Tartar rebellion, circumstances were not the less very serious, for it was to be feared that a large part of the Kirghiz population would join the rebels. The Kirghiz are divided into three hordes, the Greater, the Lesser, and the Middle, and number nearly 400,000 tents, or 2,000,000 souls. Of the different tribes, some are independent and others recognize either the sovereignty of Russia or that of the Khans of Khiva, Khokhand, and Bokhara, the most formidable chiefs of Turkestan. The middle horde, the richest, is also the largest, and its encampments occupy all the space between the rivers Sarasu, Irtish, and the upper Ishim, Lake Saisang, and Lake Aksakal. The greater horde, occupying the countries situated to the east of the middle one, extends as far as the governments of Omsk and Tobolsk. Therefore, if the Kirghiz population should rise, it would be the rebellion of Asiatic Russia, and the first thing would be the separation of Siberia, to the east of the Yenisei. It is true that these Kirghiz, mere novices in the art of war, are rather nocturnal thieves and plunderers of caravans than regular soldiers. As M. Levchin says, "A firm front or a square of good infantry could repel 10 times the number of Kirghiz, and a single cannon might destroy a frightful number." That may be, but to do this it is necessary for the square of good infantry to reach the rebellious country, and the cannon to leave the arsenals of the Russian provinces, perhaps 2,000 or 3,000 versts distant. Now, except by the direct route from Ekaterinburg to Irkutsk, the often marshy steppes are not easily practicable, and some weeks must certainly pass before the Russian troops could reach the Tartar hordes. Omsk is the center of that military organization of Western Siberia which is intended to overawe the Kirghiz population. Here are the bounds, more than once infringed by the half-subdued nomads, and there was every reason to believe that Omsk was already in danger. The line of military stations, that is to say, those Cossack posts which are ranged in echelon from Omsk to Semipolatinsk, must have been broken in several places. Now, it was to be feared that the Grand Sultans, who govern the Kirghiz districts, would either voluntarily accept, or involuntarily submit to, the dominion of Tartars, Mussulmen like themselves, and that to the hate caused by slavery was not united the hate due to the antagonism of the Greek and Mussulman religions. For some time indeed, the Tartars of Turkestan had endeavored, both by force and persuasion, to subdue the Kirghiz hordes. A few words only with respect to these Tartars. The Tartars belong more especially to two distinct races, the Caucasian and the Mongolian. The Caucasian race, which, as Abel de Remusat says, is regarded in Europe as the type of beauty in our species, because all the nations in this part of the world have sprung from it, includes also the Turks and the Persians. The purely Mongolian race comprises the Mongols, Manchu, and Tibetans. The Tartars, who now threatened the Russian Empire, belonged to the Caucasian race, and occupied Turkestan. This immense country is divided into different states, governed by khans, and hence termed khanates. The principal khanates are those of Bokhara, Kokand, Kunduz, etc. At this period the most important and the most formidable khanate was that of Bokhara. Russia had already been several times at war with its chiefs, who, for their own interests, had supported the independence of the Kirghiz against the Muscovite dominion. The present chief, Feofar Khan, followed in the steps of his predecessors. The Khanate of Bokhara has a population of 2,500,000 inhabitants, an army of 60,000 men trebled in time of war, and 30,000 horsemen. It is a rich country, with varied animal, vegetable, and mineral products, and has been increased by the accession of the territories of Balkh, Okhoi, and Meimane. It possesses 19 large towns. Bokhara, surrounded by a wall measuring more than 8 English miles, and flanked with towers, a glorious city, made illustrious by Avicenna and other learned men of the 10th century, is regarded as the center of Mussulman science, and ranks among the most celebrated cities of Central Asia. Samarkand, which contains the tomb of Tamerlane and the famous palace where the blue stone is kept on which each new Khan must seat himself on his accession, is defended by a very strong citadel. Karshi, with its triple cordon, situated in an oasis, surrounded by a marsh peopled with tortoises and lizards, is almost impregnable. Ischarjwi is defended by a population of 20,000 souls. Protected by its mountains, and isolated by its steppes, the Khanate of Bokhara is a most formidable state, and Russia would need a large force to subdue it. The fierce and ambitious Feofar now governed this corner of Tartary. Relying on the other Khans, principally those of Kokand and Kunduz, cruel and rapacious warriors, all ready to join an enterprise so dear to Tartar instincts, aided by the chiefs who ruled all the hordes of Central Asia, he had placed himself at the head of the rebellion of which Ivan Ogareff was the instigator. This traitor, impelled by insane ambition as much as by hate, had ordered the movement so as to attack Siberia. Mad indeed he was if he hoped to rupture the Muscovite Empire. Acting under his suggestion, the Emir, which is the title taken by the Khans of Bokhara, had poured his hordes over the Russian frontier. He invaded the government of Semipolatinsk, and the Cossacks, who were only in small force there, had been obliged to retire before him. He had advanced farther than Lake Balkhash, gaining over the Kirghiz population on his way. Pillaging, ravaging, enrolling those who submitted, taking prisoners those who resisted, he marched from one town to another, followed by those impedimenta of Oriental sovereignty which may be called his household, his wives and his slaves, all with the cool audacity of a modern Genghis Khan. It was impossible to ascertain where he now was, how far his soldiers had marched before the news of the rebellion reached Moscow, or to what part of Siberia the Russian troops had been forced to retire. All communication was interrupted. Had the wire between Kolyvan and Tomsk been cut by Tartar scouts, or had the Emir himself arrived at the Yeniseisk provinces? Was all the lower part of western Siberia in a ferment? Had the rebellion already spread to the eastern regions? No one could say. The only agent which fears neither cold nor heat, which can neither be stopped by the rigors of winter nor the heat of summer, and which flies with the rapidity of lightning, the electric current, was prevented from traversing the steppes, and it was no longer possible to warn the Grand Duke, shut up in Irkutsk, of the danger threatening him from the treason of Ivan Ogareff. A courier only could supply the place of the interrupted current. It would take this man some time to traverse the 5,200 versts between Moscow and Irkutsk. To pass the ranks of the rebels and invaders he must display almost superhuman courage and intelligence. But with a clear head and a firm heart much can be done. "Shall I be able to find this head and heart?" thought the Czar. End of Book 1, Chapter 2.